Luke, I think this is a smashing film, and I of course forgot. I'm very sorry to say that this is an award-winning film. It's the best documentary in the festival this year. It's a beautiful film. It's my kind of slow, meditative film, and I really love that quality about it. So that's why. I mean, I was one of the people who was judging, and that's why I put my vote for this film. So I'll put that up front. Can you just explain a little bit, how did this film evolve? How did it start? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I suppose first I'd just like to apologise on behalf of Feargal, the director, Feargal Ward, who can't be here. He's based in Berlin, and he's got another project that needs to be finished very, very soon, so he's not as available as we'd like him to be, and I know he'd love to be here. Feargal is from a place called Barrackstown or Kilmacredock, which is really the next parish over from Thomas, so he would have driven past Thomas's house on the way to visit his mother regularly and seen sort of signs written, handwritten signs. Most of us, when we see handwritten signs like that outside someone's house, kind of keep driving, you know. We might even step in the accelerator a little bit, but Feargal's the kind of character who'll stop and go in and have a chat with people like that. He's very interested in the margins and in people who have slightly different esoteric lifestyles. Like his previous film was about a gay Japanese sound artist who lived in a middle-class housing estate in North Dublin, you know, so he doesn't go for the normal types, you know. And I think the fact that Feargal grew up in that community sort of enabled a conversation to begin with Thomas that I would have struggled to create with Thomas, and other filmmakers would have. I mean, Feargal's an immensely patient person, and he was willing to have sort of 3 to 4 months of chit-chat with this guy before he even took out a camera. I mean, a stills camera. To
build up a rapport with him.
Sure.
Or just to,
and not an easy thing to do, as you can imagine from seeing the film. You know, he's a... I like Thomas a lot, but he is hard work, you know, and he obviously doesn't trust people easily, but it's like the old thing of just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you, I suppose, you know, like he's paranoid with justification, it turns out. But so it's a tribute to Feargal's patience, I think, and his willingness to build that relationship up. And it's interesting what you say about the pace of the film and its qualities, because I suppose that's why it's so nice to be here in a room like this watching it. And thanks to Bertha DocHouse for programming the film in collaboration with IFL. I mean, it's so nice to be in a cinema that's dedicated to documentaries. I think that's really just a special thing. But this film is very much a cinema film. Like, it's not... I mean, documentaries often could be on Netflix, they could be on telly. You know, they have that kind of editorial pacing and sort of approach. But I suppose what I like almost most about the film is that deliberate pace, that it nothing really happens for a long time, you know, but that is the life of a bachelor farmer, and it's not just a sort of aesthetic pose, it's a genuine representation of an existence. But on a TV station, you know, you might flick over, or you know, once you've paid your tenner and you're in the middle of row B, you're not going to get up and leave just because nothing happens for the first 10 minutes, you know. But so it's really great to see a full cinema, because this is how this film was designed to be enjoyed, you know.
I want to ask just one more question, and then I'm going to open it out.
Okay.
I suppose it follows on from that process that you've just talked about. How was this film funded? Because it must be a nightmare as a producer. Perhaps to be working with someone like Feargal, saying, well, you know. So how did you put the finances together for this film?
Well, you know, to be fair to Feargal and Tig, and I must say a word about Tig O'Sullivan, who's his creative collaborator, and they're very much like the Coen brothers. You don't really know where one begins and the other ends in terms of the filmmaking processes, and that this is their third or fourth full-length film with each other. They'd kind of got the film board interested, and then we got money to do a sort of development shoot, and then we went back to them, and then we got more money out of them. Now Feargal shoots everything himself and does nearly all of the sound himself as well, so it's an amazing production value, I think, for the budget that it had. I mean, it's a very, very low budget documentary. I think we had 100,000 from the film board, and then we got another. We ran out of money then before we did the reconstructions, and so we had to. We went to Sheffield, and we had a really unpromising meeting this woman came in who was kind of like an Angela Merkel type lady, you know, no nonsense, and sat down and went, "I did not arrange this meeting. I do not know why I'm here meeting you." And I was like, "Oh God."
Not a good start.
And I was like, German TV, what are they going to care? And then within 24 hours, she was our co-producer, Barbara Beeman. So it just shows you, like, she produced Citizen 4, you know, the Snowden film. So, like, amazing woman. So she came in with the last batch of cash and got us over the line. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, yes, all hands are going up already. That's fantastic. So
Jesus.
you, sir, I think, and then at the back, yep. Actually, you, sir, it's Mark.
Go on, Mark.
One of the members of the board.
Yeah.
He's one of the plants. Mark.
So what were Thomas's motivations for inviting the camera into his life, and what did he think of the movie?
Well, I think it would probably be an exaggeration to say he invited the camera in. But I know what you're saying. Like, why did he agree to do it? I two reasons. One, I think Feargal is a very genuine, sincere person with a lot of integrity, and I think Thomas realised that. And as I say, Feargal's patience created a good relationship there. And Thomas wouldn't have that many warm relationships in his life. You know, the life he has chosen to lead is very solitary. His personality means it's difficult for him to get on with people sometimes. So I think one of the reasons was the warm personal connection. But I also think Thomas had an agenda, you know, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about that. He was someone who was, you know, needed allies, and he wanted a story to be told. And it's funny because, you know, when we went to show him the film, it was interesting because Thomas had his own vision, you know, for the film, which is slightly different. Not massive. Like, he likes the film a lot, but he was really pissed off at us that it wasn't called The Blood-Soaked Mafia of North Kildare County Council. And as a producer responsible for the legal aspect of the production, that was never going to happen. And he also was really annoyed we hadn't used Twisted Sister 15 times. He literally wanted it in every scene. Genuinely, he did. Like, that was a big note that came back, you know. And they're very expensive, so that wasn't going to happen. But, you know, it's funny, he came to the Kildare premiere, and I was obviously a bit nervous about what his response would be, even though we'd seen it already, but he hadn't seen it in this environment. And he kind of came in just before the film started and no one knew he was here. And he obviously got tremendous ovation then when we produced him. And it was amazing. I said to him, when was the last time you were in the cinema? He goes, 30 years ago. And I said, was it not really weird? Because there was these posters in the lobby. I said, you came in here and saw yourself. What was that like? It must have been strange. And he just looked at me and went, it was like water off a duck's back. So, you know, he's someone who is able to deal with things. Yeah. It's a fascinating scene there. But he got to say his piece then about Kildare County Council, which I'm not going to repeat.
Sorry, yes, madam.
I have two questions. What was the problem with the calf, as you know, had a broken tail, and then why did the cow have to be shot?
The cow,
In the middle?
Monica.
Yeah.
Monica.
Monica.
Thomas gets very attached to animals and probably keeps them longer than a farmer normally would. And sometimes the animals just die of sickness of old age. Monica couldn't get back on her feet. And once a cow is off her feet, you know it's the end, really. So, because a cow can't survive if it can't stand. And we did have a long conversation about that scene in the editing room, as you can imagine, you know, because it is quite hard to watch. But it's interesting, I'm reading a book called The Cow Book by John Connell, who's a beautiful writer who, it's published by Granta, but he's a cattle farmer himself in Longford. And so much of it is about death and about losing animals and about that visceral, really intense nature of being a farmer. And that was something. It's sort of a bookend to the shot near the start where you see him with the calves sucking his fingers. And
what happened to the calf in the beginning? That he had like a torn tail?
You know, I've never noticed the tail. You're obviously a big cow aficionado, and I have to just bow to your expertise. I'm sorry. But I suppose Thomas's relationship with the animals was a very big part of the film. And I guess at that moment in the film, it's Thomas's darkest moment on his other journey.
Right.
So it sort of felt like a way of kind of really bringing you to the the darkest hour was before the dawn, you know.
And the reality of his life as well.
Yeah.
Very much so, like. Very much so, yeah, absolutely.
So, I think you had a...
I'm enjoying Farm Talk with Luke McManus.
Oh, there you go, no problem. So,
I was just interested in the, like when you started making the film, was the court case resolved?
Okay.
Or did you not know what was going to happen? And did that, with a lot of legal people at the end of your credits there, I mean, how exposed were you legally?
Well, we came into the film after the High Court verdict, which is the guy in the pipe. So he'd lost in the High Court and he'd lost the oral hearing, which is the first conversation in the field. So he was going to the Supreme Court, and it was sort of a 50-50. Like, they were happy with how it had gone in the hearings, but they weren't, you know, we went in there not knowing what was going to happen. And it was actually a very interesting experience, because we've all seen the film where the guy finally wins. I was thinking The Name of the Father, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis, and he's like, yeah, you know, and he's like naming names on the steps and euphoric. And Thomas was naming names, but he wasn't at all euphoric, like, you know, and he said a lot of very questionable things on the steps of the court, you know, that we weren't able to use. So it left us with a bit of a problem narratively. Like, it's almost like when you live this for 6 or 7 years, it's very hard to accept that the system's ever gonna find in your favour.
Yeah.
And I think he couldn't even process that they had. And he said to me, you know, this doesn't end here. And I said, well, that's why it's called the Supreme Court. It kind of does end here, you know. But he wanted to take it to Europe. I was like, no, you've won. You don't take it to Europe. You know. But I suppose it's that thing of your life becomes so dominated by something that it's quite hard to let go of it then in a weird way. There's sort of an emptiness afterwards, you know. But as regards to the legal thing, it was a very tricky film, obviously, because also Thomas has a lot of beliefs about Intel that may or may not be true, but we weren't in a position to allow him to articulate them, because we're not those kind of filmmakers. We're not like journalists who are going to go in and do all the... We didn't have the resources or the interest to try and prove that Intel were doing X or Y.
Okay.
Yeah.
You get your follow-up, there's somebody else and somebody else.
Was poisoning animals. Was that...
Well, this is the thing. So basically, what we ended up with was an illusion that we felt expressed Thomas's opinion and taking the situation without ever pointing the finger ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's a bit mysterious and a bit open-ended, but in a way, I kind of almost prefer that. And I think, again, why a cinema documentary, I work in TV a lot as a TV director and producer, and you know, it's kind of drummed into you about clarity, and it has to all make sense, and it has to all be neatly wrapped up. And sometimes when there's these kind of little sort of open-ended things like Thomas's The Rabbit and all this kind of crack, like, it's sort of nice to have these unexplained avenues, you know. And it was the best we could do for him without... And actually the biggest concern wasn't just exposing us legally, but that was a big concern, but also exposing him, because imagine if we'd allowed him to libel Intel and then Intel were able to sue him and take the land. You know, imagine if the film had lost him the land. It was just unspeakable risk. So we were very, very careful to avoid that kind of stuff, you know.
Sir, and then Madam. Yep.
Yeah, hi Luke. Great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Well done.
This is a local man. It's from North Kildare. North Kildare represents. Yeah.
I grew up with Feargal actually, and so know him since I was a child. But what I'm sort of amazed at is the sensitivity of how you filmed him. Like you said yourself, he was hard work, or he can be hard work.
Yeah.
And you know, Feargal doesn't seem to shy away from the fact that he's strange, right? He's surrounded by. But did you still like him? So did that take much sort of playing around with editing or capture? Because you know, it can come across as he's totally weird, right? And you go, I don't want to deal with this weird person.
Well, I mean,
it's just done with soft hands, and it just comes across very well.
Very much so, yeah. Now, Feargal is a very good listener and sensitive filmmaker, and being kind to Thomas was always part of our sort of rule book, you know, for various reasons. One, just out of respect for him, but also from a filmmaking point of view, you know, we didn't want him to be... We wanted to focus on what we found interesting about him. So if he was talking about things that were sort of maybe conspiracy theories or similar, we'd kind of go, right, not only can we not legally stand them up, let's just not talk about that. And I suppose what was interesting for me coming to the film was it almost perfectly fits the hackneyed Hollywood screenplay structure, you know, that you hear people, the hero's journey, where you have this guy and it's all about what he holds dearest being undermined and threatened by an external, and he goes on this quest for justice, you know, and it really does. But Feargal and Tig are such interesting filmmakers that it never feels like a sort of cheesy Hollywood treatment of it, you know.
It's a very empathetic study
Sure.
of an eccentric individual.
Big time.
But you know, you were drawn into this guy's world. You know, going through his record collection is
All right.
really interesting.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. Like.
Yeah.
It,
Sorry.
Go
You had a question, mate.
I've got sort of deflected from what I was going to say by thinking of how many people would obviously want to turn it into a Hollywood epic. It would work very well.
yeah, no, yeah.
Unfortunately,
James Franco is obviously, you know, just the mind boggles.
Yeah. No, I was just going to comment about, I don't know anything about the Irish legal system, but there was a statement at the beginning which confused me. It sort of fell into place. Really, that they talked about him as being a life tenant. Well, in England, if you're a life tenant, you're not the freeholder. Whatever your rights are,
Right.
they finish at the end of your life, or they may go into your successor. So in England, there'd always be the person behind that who trumped the life tenant, and that would be the freeholder. But clearly, it made it, as it went on, one assumed that he was actually the owner of the land,
I
not
think
just a
so.
life tenant. Which
Well, there was the Land Commission in Ireland when they took a lot of land
Yeah,
off
so
the aristocracy
maybe,
and doled it out to people. And his house was the so there's an estate called Carton, like a big
Yes,
stately
I
home,
know that,
and
yeah.
his house was the steward of Carton's house,
Yeah,
so he would have
yeah.
been the sort of head retainer, I guess, or
It
the
all looked
chief
pretty
gamekeeper.
grim
or
by the
whatever.
time he got there, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
I was just going to ask one more thing, and that relates to the time scale of the case, and
Right.
also how he, having taken a case myself as far as that, as a litigant in person, I know it takes 7 years, but at what point did he get legal aid? How did he finance the beginning, or did he take the 10 million from them and pay it back again afterwards? Or
Well, what he did was you don't pay until you've lost.
But I mean, he said no. But the
So what
lawyer,
he-
if he had lawyers, I mean, I did it on my own without lawyers. But
Well,
if
but he didn't
it
pay
costs
the
you-
lawyers until the case was over.
I see. Yeah,
So
he's
if he
very
had
lucky
if
in
he
that
had
case.
lost, he would have had to pay the
No
lawyers.
win, no
but,
fee.
but because he won, the other side had to pay his costs. So the IDA ended up paying all his
Yes,
lawyers.
that's what happened.
But
yeah.
then if he had lost, he would have had all this money
Exactly.
with which to pay the lawyers.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Just from a technical sort of view, did Feargal make, who made the decision to sort of keep it off the stick, like no shots were on tripods that I saw?
yeah,
They-
Feargal is kind of one of these people who's like, I've made my mind up how I'm going to make this film,
Okay.
and I'm not going to. There was a few tripod shots that never made it. He just started to throw them out in the edit. I think everything's on a Movi.
Yeah.
It's shot in a Blackmagic pocket camera, which is about the size of an iPhone, on a 35mm lens. I think 95% of the shots are on a 35mm lens. So he has this crazy rig, like the steering wheel, with this tiny camera and then microphones and a recorder, and he holds it in front of him like that. It's really taxing.
Yeah.
But you get this lovely sort of immersive quality from it. And it's funny in documentary at the moment, there's lots of chat about VR and goggles, and we're going to be more immersive and we're going to be, subjective and all that. But I remember talking to Feargal and Tig about this. I think Tig made a very good point. If you've got a steady cam wandering around with someone and a sort of very atmospheric sound design that brings into that world, that's as immersive as anything, you know. And for me, one of the best things about the film is that sense of you really know what it's like to be him now, you know. It isn't just the story from an external perspective. It's absolutely from his perspective. And that curious character study.
Can I just jump in
Yeah,
before I get the
go
next
on.
question? Actually, on that point about sound,
Right.
can you talk a little bit more about the sound design of the film? Because there is this sense, the kind of ambient sound of Thomas's world,
Right.
which is conveyed in the film.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit how that was
Sure.
achieved? Because
Well-
that's
well,
really a
Tig
striking
is-
part about the film.
Tig, the editor, is a big sound geek and he's very into sound, and that's always been part of his box of tricks, and Feargal's as well. You know, they were always very interested in that. And I suppose when you're making a film about someone who's on their own, the kind of ambience of what they hear is a massively important thing. And then where he lives is in this strange kind of zone of where the country meets the city, you know, and it's like development is kind of swept around him. So you have this kind of busy road.
You get the road noise coming over the
It's
hedge.
right there, like, you know what I mean? And there's a railway line, and there's just commuters, and like that idea of the enemy at the gates, and you can hear them bubbling away outside. And then obviously the radio became this fabulous character in the film, you know, and because telling the story was actually really hard, because it's a very involved technical story, and then this idea of the radio archive, and again Feargal's patience in going through the radio archive and finding the right bits, and it just kind of popped in there enough to keep you informed about what was going on, and it sort of becomes this establishment chorus, you know, this is what Establishment Ireland thinks of what's going on, these voices, these quite well-to-do voices coming out of the radio, you know. So.
And radio is also modernity as well, isn't it?
For sure.
Yeah, you know, it's
absolutely, absolutely. Anyone else?
Any more questions?
There you go. They've all gone shy.
No, they haven't.
All right.
Yes.
What was the view of the community around Thomas? Were they sort of split, or all behind him, or some support?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because that's a good question. It's hard to know. I mean, I suppose, what can I say other than, you know, we did the Kildare premiere in Naas, and loads of people showed up, and we're going to Maynooth, and it's nearly sold out. Now Maynooth is the next town down from him, and on Wednesday I was in Blanchardstown, which is kind of West Dublin, North Kildare area, and there was loads of locals in there as well. I think there's a lot of sympathy for him. Like the fella he meets in the car park in the supermarket is almost that was so lucky. He was just a guy.
Wow.
And it was just brilliant, because he was kind of funny, and he also literally said the big question, would you not take the money? You'd have a great quality of life, you know? For fuck's sake. Like, you know? And I think that's what most people in the neighbourhood think is, wow, I would take the 10 million. But that's the best thing about the film, maybe, is that you have a man without a price, and that's not a very not a very commonplace thing. I mean, we've all got our prices here, I would have thought, you know. I certainly do. And, you know, to come across someone who isn't that interested in money at all just makes him really fascinating, I think, people, you know. So I'm sure some people think he's crazy, obviously, I mean, but there's a character like that in most rural communities in Ireland, and maybe in Britain too. You know, there are these people who they begin slightly marginalised, and then through, you know, Feargal talks about his life story, you know, the parents dying, the brothers moving away from the farm. He used to play Gaelic football with a team who then all emigrated. Like, he'd be like mid-50s now, Thomas. So when he was growing up, it was the early 80s, which was an absolute terrible time in Ireland economically. So all his friends left, and you can kind of see how his cultural references are the Boomtown Rats, Dallas, you know, like he had a life full of creativity and socialising and going to gigs and all that kind of stuff, and then his world just got smaller and smaller and smaller, you know.
Telescope down.
Exactly, yeah.
Can I just ask one thing about the other the actors?
Yes.
Yeah.
To him. The IDA man.
Yes.
Forgive me, but he was from Central Casting, a nasty bureaucrat.
Did you think?
I did.
Because
Being a bureaucrat.
well, it's interesting you should say that, because when we were auditioning actors, we and Feargal talked about how we didn't want a nasty character. We wanted someone avuncular and kind of, you know, warmish, you know. And
well, if that's your idea of
well, you're not my idea of avuncular, which is funny because you're my uncle. But anyway, that's another story.
I'm his real uncle.
But that is actually that is genuinely an interesting point, because what we liked about Phil was that he had a prosperous quality, but he was kind of he's a very warm guy. Like, he's a lovely man, primary school teacher, and he was an excellent actor. I hadn't worked a lot, and we didn't want a recognisable face off RTE. You know, we really didn't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And also bringing an actor into that environment as well could have gone a bit oddly, you know. And we didn't know how Thomas was going to respond, so we wanted someone that we felt had a bit of humanity.
One
to
more thing about Thomas.
Yes.
I thought it was a great film, by the way, and all that. So, but he uses a supermarket which was obviously built on the site of somebody's farm that was kicked off the farm. Or
Well,
he did a deal with
interesting you should say that, but there's actually a great story there. So, farmers like Thomas used to go to the marts, which were the auction rooms for livestock, where dealers would buy cattle. And there'd be a lovely social outlet, maybe once a month or once every couple of months. They'd meet a few other boys and have a few drinks and all that. And a lot of the marts in Ireland have closed and been replaced by Polish guys driving vans, typically. Or, you know, like the fella who took Monaco away, basically. He's the new face of the mart. So that social outlet has been closed, and it's kind of increased Thomas's isolation. But that supermarket is actually built on the old mart in Maynooth. And so if you can imagine, this was once this place that he went to kind of rub shoulders with his peers, and now he's going up this escalator and there's that voice going, prepare to push the trolley, you know, prepare to push the trolley. And it's just this awful kind of cold clinical quality to it, you know. So remember going down, we were like, we need a scene off the farm. What does he do except, and Feargal goes, he goes to Tesco.
Yeah.
And I was like, Tesco, great, you know. But then I went down and was like, Jesus Christ, it's like a space station, you know. I think it's the biggest supermarket on the island of Ireland, like, you know. It's insanely vast. And I just thought, what a perfect, because it's kind of like it's what you'd imagine the Intel factory looks like at the inside, you know. It's that scale and that kind of newness and all that. So he was so incongruous in it, like, it worked really well visually, like, you know. And then we met Liam.
Yeah.
And you know what happened then? 3 months later, I came out of my local supermarket and I met Liam in the car park. It was just, Ireland's like that. What can you say? It's strange. Yeah.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions if people
If anyone has any.
Yeah. I've got.
Oh, there's one.
Oh, yeah. I was going on one, but that's fine. Yep.
Try one. How long did the film take to make?
Okay.
Linked in, how many people were around Mr. Reid in making of the film?
Okay.
And finally, how has his life changed now that all of those people are no longer there?
Gotcha.
With him?
That's 3 questions.
Well, they're all
I kind of know what you mean, yeah. I think it was like 2.5, 3 years, roughly, around the making of the film, from the first conversation to it being finished. Feargal works in a very small, way. I'd say 90% of the filming was Feargal on his own. So it's literally Feargal and Thomas, which I think you can tell. You know, all those conversations were just Feargal and Thomas, all the stuff walking around the land. The day we went to the supermarket, I was there as well. The day the IDA men came, I was there. When we did the big reconstructions with the, you know, actors and the judges and all that, we had a few more people there, but it was never more than 8 or 9 people. And then actually, when the film ended, that is actually always a strange moment in any documentary, when you've had this very intense relationship with someone and then you're not around. And the fact that Feargal lives in Berlin exacerbated that a little bit, you know, because he was kind of coming back, you know, to see Thomas to get the film made, and then he kind of wasn't, you know. So we kind of all picked up the threads again with him once we got through the editing, and we went down and showed him the film and invited him to the premiere. And I was in Blanchardstown on Wednesday. His brother actually showed up, which was great to see. John Reid was there. So, yeah, like, it was. He's not doing bad, Thomas. The only slight concern is that after this case, the Irish government brought in new legislation that basically closes up the loopholes, so that if the IDA wanted to, they could now go back and take the land off Thomas. And you know, they had pretty much unanimity in the Irish Parliament for that, you know, which shows you how highly regarded the IDA are in Ireland. So I suppose Thomas is now a bit worried about that, you know. But fundamentally, his life has not changed at all. You know, like, he's obviously someone who ploughs his own furrow, and he's right back in it.
I think I've got the nod, so
All
I'm
right.
afraid. Thank you very much for all your questions, and also thank you, Luke.
No, you're very welcome. And
Please
if you
show
enjoyed the
in
film, tell your friends.